Kaydub here, and in this episode of Basic Buddhism, we are going to look at the Threefold Refuge, otherwise known as the Triple Gem. We will also look at the 5 precepts, look at some of the interpretations and the importance of the 5 precepts. And then in the next talk, so the next episode, we talk about how one is a lay follower of the Buddhist path. All right, so let's start with what are the Threefold Refuge thingamajiggies, or the Triple Gem. So the Threefold Refuge, or the Triple Gem, is taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And Bhikkhu Bodhi, one of the writers in my tradition, but the Theravada tradition, states that taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha are all sort of undertaken to provide a sense of security, even if life seems to be going very well for us. And it's a reminder to view our lives more wisely by examining our lives. So we may indeed have our life going in the correct direction, but if we examine it more closely, we can still see that there is dukkha and there's room for improvement. So, for example, I may have, let's say that I get my dream job. Now, just because I have my dream job doesn't mean that there isn't any dukkha going on. As a matter of fact, um, there's probably a lot of dukkha going on. Sort of like the iceberg. You can only see the tip. And with wisdom, we can see more of the iceberg and examine those areas so that we can improve our lives even more. And there are some aspects of our life that Bhikkhu Bodhi says that we should examine relatively closely. Not to the point where it's given us anxiety and stress, but something to be mindful of and to work on over time is the fragility of our physical bodies. For example, aging, illness, and death are always a possibility. Natural disasters occur that change our circumstances as well, and taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha can assist in addressing when those situations occur. As I already mentioned, death may occur, whether it's ourselves or someone that we know, someone that we love. Underlying uncertainty of life, it's very fragile. Um, Change a couple of circumstances, and we go from doing very well to mediocre or worse. Also, the possibility of future dukkha after death. Now, from a Buddhist standpoint, there is this process called rebirth. And so, if one does not realize the Dhamma to its fullest extent, which is achieving nirvana, the unconditioned state, the unconditioned element, I should say, then there is the possibility of future dukkha, whether that be in the human plane of existence, or whether it be animal, the hell realms, the hungry ghosts. Those are sort of the realms that have a lot of dukkha. And there is a lot of dukkha still in the heavenly realms too. It's just that they're more difficult to see because heavenly pleasures, and from a Buddhist standpoint, are far exceed the human pleasures that we get here. So it's sort of a reminder that even though things go well, there's still probably dukkha underlying there if we closely examine it. And that's not really pessimistic in my opinion. In my opinion, that's definitely realistic. Um, just because everything's awesome doesn't mean that everything is really awesome because we are not taking all of the available information in. That's why there's an emphasis on mindfulness. And then not only just mindfulness, but being heedful of what the information we're taking in, taking action based upon that information. So the triple gem are the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So the Buddha refers to the Buddha as a teacher, as someone who rediscovered the path to nirvana, to liberation, and then set forth to teach that path. It's not anything specific when it comes to physical form. So Buddha rupas or statues, such as one that's on the screen right now, that's not what monks would suggest that we focus on. But as human beings, we like having these icons and idols, and that sort of helps us to better focus our minds on that particular person and their qualities. So, but the emphasis is on the qualities of the Buddha. There's a chant that goes through the qualities of the Buddha, and that being fully enlightened, for example, um, and of virtuous qualities such as compassion, universal compassion and loving kindness. The Dharma or the Dhamma, I'm a Pali guy, so Dhamma for me, Dharma for if you're in the Sanskrit, it is the teachings, or to the highest degree truth with a capital T, sort of. That's difficult to comprehend, so I'm not going to touch that. But I sort of view Dhamma as a map. So the Buddha is the map maker, and the Dhamma lays out that map. And that leads us on the path toward liberation, to nirvana, to the ending of samsara, the wandering from lifetime to lifetime. And then there's the Sangha. The Sangha is basically the order of monks and nuns, although I'm not aware of any order of nuns organized to my knowledge. It's sort of faded out, but I would hope it would resurface. And so I see the Sangha, the noble Sangha, is the noble disciples of the Buddha. I see the Sangha as guides. So yes, we have the map, but sometimes we need someone else's interpretation so that we can read the map a little bit better. And so I see the Buddha as the map maker, the one that explored and found the way, and then the Dhamma as sort of the map being laid out, or the map itself, and the Sangha sort of as guides so that we can read the map better, so we can get to our destination, that being the path of liberation. And like I said, just like there are chants for the Buddha in the Dhamma, there are chants for the Dhamma in the Sangha. Thus, indeed, is a blessed one. Is sort of how one of them starts. My mind is blanking on how the rest of it goes, though. He is the blessed one. He is the Holy One, fully enlightened, endowed with clear vision, virtuous conduct, sublime, the knower of the worlds, the incomparable leader of those to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, awakened and blessed. It used another translation is gods and men, but I like to use humans because that encompasses all of humans. No clear distinction between men, women, or transgender male, transgender female. Just human beings. I think is more of an all-encompassing way to look at it now. Uh, the Dominant Blessed One is perfectly expounded to be seen here and now, not delayed in time, inviting one to come and see, onward leading to be known by the wise, each for themselves. And then the Song of the Blessed One disciples sent on a good way. The Song of the Blessed One disciples have done on a great way. The Song of the Blessed Disciples on the right path. The Song of the Blessed One disciples on a proper way. That is to say, to four pairs of men, the eight types of persons. The Song of the Blessed One disciples is fit for gifts, fit for hospitality, fit for offerings, and fit for reverential salutation, as the incomparable field of merit for the world. So those are the sort of the three chants, and that's in English. I could do it in Pali, but that's a little bit rusty right now. So I would need to actually have it in front of me, and I don't have that in front of me right now. So that is the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And definitely in times where we're feeling insecure and maybe fear, recollecting those can create a sense of calm, a peace of mind, a sense of security. It may not prevent us, for example, from being injured or what have you, but it helps us with our peace of mind. And that's an extremely important aspect of life that sort of gets pushed to the side sometimes here in the United States because we have very busy lifestyles. So That's the triple gem, or the threefold refuge, as I call it. And I think the reason why there are three is because some people gravitate more toward a being. So the Buddha would be the being. Some people gravitate more towards the teachings. That would be me. I think of the Buddha, I'm like, okay, that's cool. Um, the Buddha and his qualities, but I think of the Dhamma more than I do the Buddha sometimes. And so I can say, well, what does the Dhamma say about this? Because I'm taking refuge in the Dhamma. And then the Sangha, some people are more inclined to be social, so they might think of the noble Sangha as a collective sort of organization as guides to the goal. And how one takes refuge is they do these chants uh, during the day when they are getting their day started. So, for example, when I wake up in the morning, I will say Budang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranam Gacchami, which means I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dhamma, I take refuge in the Sangha. And it actually is taken 3 times. For the second time, I take refuge in the Buddha. For the second time, I take refuge in Dhamma. For a second time, I take refuge in the Sangha. And then the third time. For the third time, I take refuge in the Buddha. For a third time, I take refuge in the Dhamma. For a third time, I take refuge in the Sangha. And so there's that formal chant. And that's sort of like, that's the formal way of saying that I put my faith in the triple gem. Also, we have to look at the 5 training precepts. Now, these precepts are very straightforward when you hear them, but when you really critically analyze them, as Bhikkhu Bodhi and Thanissaro Bhikkhu have, and they're 2 of my sources. I'm going to have the sources in the description, so don't worry, they're going to be there. Um, the interpretations can sometimes be a little bit out of whack with what we interpret for society now, as in 2022. And we'll get more into that as we go through the precepts. So the first precept is abstaining from destroying or killing living beings. The second precept is to abstain from taking what is not freely given. The third precept is to abstain from sensual or sexual misconduct. I'll explain that in a second. Fourth precept is to abstain from false speech. And the fifth precept is to abstain from intoxicants which induce heedlessness. And we'll talk about what that means in a second as well. But why would we take the precepts? So why every morning when I get up do I recollect and chant that I'm taking these precepts? So Bhikkhu Bodhi says that it's sort of a way to increase what he calls inner virtue. In other words, developing kindness and patience and compassion, and encouraging acts that express those inner virtues, the kindness, the patience, the loving kindness, and also as rules of conduct for actions to accord with sort of the ethical sort of ideals or goals in a Buddhist practice. Just sort of a side note, abstain. The precept goes, I undertake to abide the precept to abstain from killing living beings. To abstain means to restrain oneself from doing something. So it's not thou shalt not kill, it's I am going to try my best as a human being not to kill another living being. And if said precept is indeed violated, one can take that precept again and try better for the next time. And it doesn't really. There are certain degrees for these precepts, which we're going to get into, and we'll talk about that in a second. Also, reducing the influence of what are called defilements or unwholesome mental factors. We take those precepts to reduce the influence of those. And the precepts use oneself sort of as a criterion, and you can see that in the Samyutta Nikaya 55.7. I'm not going to get into too much detail about what that says, but I would prefer that no one kills me, so I'm not going to kill someone or something. And the fifth precept is a little bit unique because it's more geared toward oneself. But if you think about it, when you when someone takes intoxicants and they take a lot of that intoxicant, it can influence how they treat other beings. So it actually has, although it's more directed toward oneself, it does have social and ethical implications. And if you wanted to look at it positively, the first precept would be I'm going to develop compassion. Second one, I'm going to develop honesty and contentment. Third one, I'm going to develop marital fidelity and celibacy if you're a monk. The fourth, I'm developing speaking truth. And the fifth, I'm developing heedfulness to a greater extent. All right, so it's said that these precepts provide safety and security to oneself and others because others will be free from fear that you will not try and kill them or steal from them. And there's also spiritual reassurance for the practitioner because when we're on our deathbed, we can think, well, I was a virtuous person because I followed these precepts to the best of my ability. And even when I didn't, I made, I took it upon myself to put the effort into being better at those things. And so when we're on our deathbed, we have more wholesome sort of thoughts, which is thought to influence rebirth. So it's a little bit, it is sort of something that benefits the practitioner as well as others. So the first precept, I undertake to abide precept to abstain from intentionally destroying living beings or killing living beings. There has to be an awareness of a living being. It's sort of a requirement. So if I go outside and I step on an ant and I didn't see the ant, that's different than if I see the ant and I stomp on it. So one has definite intention. The other has sort of it doesn't really have any intention at all. I was just not watching where I was stepping, and I would be like, oh crap, I should really pay attention to that, especially now with the weather being better. And to sort of get to what the commentaries, and Bhikkhu Bodhi knows these a lot better than I do, so I'm taking his word for it. A violation is destroying or killing a living being which breathes and has consciousness. So that would include probably most animals, um, because they do breathe, and they do have maybe limited states of consciousness. They have limited communication means to tell us that they're conscious of anything. So that becomes very difficult. And another side note is even if you are commanding someone or something else to kill, that is a violation on you because your intention is behind that. So be very careful when it comes to that if you are a practitioner or you're interested in practicing. Also, when we get into that, we also get into self-defense. And to put it very to give you a summary version, I would say that that is permissible, but please, try to have non-lethal means to subdue someone or something. That would be my suggestion because technically, that is, if you do kill someone in self-defense, that is a violation of the precept. But at the same time, I see that as permissible because that's sort of a protection thing. And if you're protecting a family or if you're protecting people that are getting hurt, that's a different story. I would say that that is permissible, although it still technically is a violation. The second precept, undertake to abide to abstain from taking what is not freely given. So things without an owner are okay. So if you are in the woods and no one owns this land, it's okay to gather up the wood and make a fire, for example. However, things that are possessed legally and blamelessly, and you take those, that is considered taking what is not freely given. And this includes stealing, which means you do it stealthily, robbery, which means you're taking it by force, and deceit, which means that you're playing with someone's mind to get what you want. So those would be sort of violations of the second precept. But then you have the national treasure dilemma, I'm stealing a Declaration of Independence so that this other person doesn't steal the Declaration of Independence. That's sort of something that sort of is in that area where it's like technically it's a violation of the precept, but I would argue that Benjamin Gates has a decent intention there. It's more wholesome than maybe what the other guy is thinking about doing. So I think that would be permissible, but still a violation. The third precept, I undertake to abide by precept to abstain from sexual misconduct. Sometimes it's interpreted as sensual misconduct, which means moderation in sensual pleasures, basically. So uh, Bhikkhu Bodhi says this includes most sensual pleasures, but sexual relations are sort of an emphasis that can cause a lot of division and discord and hurt feelings. And once again, if we're using sort of yourself as sort of a gauge, I wouldn't appreciate if someone killed me. I wouldn't appreciate if someone stole from me. I wouldn't appreciate if someone slept with my wife. That's sort of using yourself, the golden rule type situation. So what is considered a violation? So any women, and I would argue guys as well, although it's geared toward men because women during the time of the Buddha did not have a whole bunch of rights. They were expected to be domestic servants basically and take care of the household while the man went out and provided the living situation, so the living wage, for example. So women protected by family, women protected by the state, so that would be up in prison, who has taken a vow of celibacy, so nuns, who is married or engaged. So that one's pretty straightforward. I would even go so far as to say to be on the conservative side if she's in a relationship with some other guy, or if the guy is in a relationship with another woman. So I wanted to go both ways here, because I feel like if you just put it exclusively on, make sure you're not sleeping with women that do this that are under these conditions. I would also suggest it for women because I believe that they can reach liberation as well. So I'm gonna say both here. So other things, rape or psychological pressure. Technically, well, rape definitely is a violation. And psychological pressure, if you don't have sex with me, I'll leave you. That is technically a violation. It's not mutual in that um, in that situation. And there are sort of degrees of gravity when it comes to this sort of situation. The force of lust is a big one. So hubba hubba hubba, that that could be a situation. The qualities of the other person. So the more virtuous qualities the person has, the higher the gravity of the situation. And if force is used, so the highest would be the force of lust is high. The qualities of the other person are virtuous, and the and force is used. So that would be the highest degree, and then there are degrees between that. So the fourth precept, I undertake to abide by the precept to abstain from false speech. This includes writing and body language. So if I know someone went a certain direction, say the police are looking for a suspect, and I say, oh, they went that way, but they actually went this way, that would be considered false speech, and that would be a violation of the precept. The intention is to mislead. So if there's no intention to mislead, then it's definitely a lesser degree. There's also a lesser degree if it's lying for the sake of a joke, which you know, for someone like me, I do that sometimes. An exaggeration, sometimes I do that too. Technically, that's a violation, but the gravity of the situation is less. So also, the gravity of the situation is based on who the falsehood is told to. Did you tell a priest? Well, guess what? That's going to be right up there. The intention to deceive and the object of falsehood. So I tell a priest that my wife is cheating on me when she's not, and there's clear evidence that she's not, and my intention is to deceive the priest to find favor with me. That would be right up there. All right, so Next is the fifth precept: undertake to abide by the precept to abstain from intoxicating substances which induce heedlessness. So heedlessness is a little bit different than mindfulness. Mindfulness is being able to take in the information, being aware of the information. Heedfulness is taking action based upon that information. So when we're talking about intoxicants, that affects both mindfulness and then heedfulness. So the information we're receiving is not the information we would receive if we were sober, and therefore the actions we would take are going to be different, for example. So the degree of this, there's no real degree. It's just, is there an intoxicant? Is there intention to take the intoxicant? And is the intoxicant ingested? And the goal of this precept is to not compromise heedfulness and prevent alteration of mind and body detrimentally. That being said, if you need medication for a medical condition, that's perfectly acceptable, even if it is an intoxicant that may involve heedfulness being affected. Now, this is relevant from an ethical standpoint because our behavior when we're intoxicated can affect other people. If I go out and I get intoxicated at a bar, for example, I may actually become more aggressive, or I may drive and, you know, because I'm intoxicated, I may get in an accident which causes death or bodily harm to others. And so, although that precept does sort of focus on my own behaviors, if that behavior is not in check, it could lead to detrimental consequences for myself and others if it gets out of hand. All right, so the five precepts are really important because we're trying to improve wholesome qualities within ourselves: compassion, loving kindness, contentment, those type of situations. And so by saying we probably shouldn't be doing this, we should abstain from this, we're trying to increase those qualities. And that gives us sort of a guide as to how to do that by preventing us from doing those things if at all possible. And it really is something we got to take upon ourselves, like all these things that I have mentioned. Just because I tell you about the Four Noble Truths doesn't mean that you're going to think about the Four Noble Truths all the time. That's on you to do if you are inclined to do that. That's why I really appreciate Buddhism, because it basically, Buddhism says, here's the path, but I'm not going to force you to take that path. That's something you got to do on your own. That's a decision you need to make. It's not forced on me. So one last note about um, the 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 triple gem and the precepts. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu says this about the precepts more specifically, but I think it applies also to the triple gem. These are used to prevent regret and promote healthy self-esteem. When there is regret, especially at the time of death, that can lead to outcomes that are not in our favor. Being reborn in the animal plane, for example, which is considered much lower than humans, because animals have a very difficult time achieving nirvana and liberation because of their limited capacity. They're in survival mode most of the time. And promoting healthy self-esteem, having a positive viewpoint of ourselves and our actions and our thoughts. And I think that's a very important point because it seems like real life beats us down a lot here in the United States. And it would be great if we could all just have one thing, just one thing we could say, but you know what? Even though life has really beaten me down, I haven't compromised my virtues. I have not compromised that I am working on loving kindness, and I'm working on mindfulness, and I'm working on compassion. And I think that's really important now because the real world, especially if you're watching the media, really is pretty negative. And so having that positive aspect and saying, look, every the environment around me may be collapsing, but I haven't given up on these things. And I'm proud of myself for doing that. All right, so in the next recording, we'll talk about what it means to be a lay follower. So until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye for now.